Welcome to the Fillius Jazz YouTube channel and to the Joe Wilder Centennial celebration. 2/22/22, a distinctive birthday for a distinguished musician. Joe Wilder was a consummate trumpet player and a man who was highly respected in the music business. He excelled at the trumpet at a young age, aspired to a career in classical music, but found out that African-American musicians in the early 1940s need not apply for symphony positions. So he turned to the big bands, the popular music of the day, and toured with many of the name bands. Somewhere in the middle, to fulfill his military service, he volunteered for the Marines and served in the 1st Integrated Marine Battalion. Deciding that life on the road had its limitations, he relocated to New York City and quickly became a first call player, again integrating both Broadway and the active New York City studio scene. One thing that people noticed over the years is Joe was a sharp dresser. He never left the house without a coat and tie, whether it was a gig at Carnegie Hall or an informal picnic. Joe always set the model for sartorial splendor. Joe was in the trumpet section of the Count Basie Orchestra during their 1954 swing through Sweden, and a chance encounter with Solveig Anderson led to a 58-year marriage, 3 daughters, and 2 grandsons. Joe was honored by the National Endowment of the Arts as a jazz master, and Hamilton College acknowledged his life accomplishments in 2004 with an honorary degree. An excerpt from the proclamation reads, "Known for your trumpet with its sumptuous tones, you are the consummate ensemble player and a masterful soloist. But beyond your remarkable versatility, you are universally admired for your professionalism and personal qualities that combine warmth and good humor with caring." It was my privilege to interview Joe Wilder twice for the Fillius Jazz Archive, and I think you'll enjoy these excerpts. You're going to hear about Joe's celebrated work ethic, an anecdote about life on the road, a rather odd encounter at a jam session, and a bit of self-reflection on his career. I wanted to ask you again, I brought it up the last time, but in watching you operate, you've been here for a few days on the campus, and you seem to have a very well-formed work ethic, as I'm going to call it. And you had told me about a few things that you believe are right in the way you operate your business and deal with other people. And I'm wondering, where did you get this work ethic? Was it something from your family, or is it just inherent in you?
I guess I got it mainly from my father, who was a musician. And my father played with a lot of the bands in Philadelphia, and he was a stickler for being on time. He used to pound that into my brothers and me, that, you know, it's better for you to come 1 hour early than to come 1 second late for something. And he would use as an example, there was a drummer that played with one of the bands he played with, and the guy was a good drummer. And he said, you know, the dance starts at 8 o'clock, and we're all there. He said, we're all sitting on the bandstand ready to play, and the drummer isn't there. He comes at 8:15. He said, and he knows it takes him at least 20 minutes to set up his drums. He said, now what sense does that make? He said, what excuse is that? And then he would say, you know, just because you're black doesn't mean you have to show up late. And they had an expression that they used to use. They would say you go to work and you come on time, and then there's another time that they called CP time, colored people's time, you know. And CPT, was a thing they used to use with the blacks. Use it in reference to the other people who came late, you see. And they would say, well, there's such a thing as the correct time and CPT, colored people's time, you know. And so this was a real put down, so you didn't want to get involved with that. But that's basically where I guess I got it from my father. And the other idea, the deportment of the guys on the job and things like that. Felt that they had an obligation to come on time, perform properly, to dress properly, and conduct themselves in a way that people wouldn't have any problems with them, you know.
Was there a period of adjustment or any unpleasantness in the fact that the Marines had just become integrated?
Yeah, it was rough. In the beginning, it was a pretty rough situation because there were no black officers, and there were only a few black non-commissioned officers, corporals, and maybe a couple buck sergeants, but that came later, actually. So that all the personnel with any authority were white, all the personnel. And of course, we were in the middle of the South, so conditions were based on the racial problems that we had, prior to that. And of course, in the military, it was a lot more severe.
You had told me about an incident with one of the bands you were with in the South, I think it was South Carolina.
Lucky Milliner.
Yes,
yeah.
And it was the first time you'd been down there with a
we
integrated band.
We were in South Carolina, and Lucky Milliner, Lucky was a very nice fellow. He was not a musician, but he had a lot of natural talent for selecting the right kinds of tunes and tempos and things of that nature. But we had, I think, 6 of the members of the band were white. And when we arrived early in South Carolina at this hall where we were going to play, and suddenly up drove the sheriff with his deputy in the police car, and he said, "Who's in charge here?" And so Lucky said, "I am." He said, "Well, I'm just here to tell you there's not going to be any mixed bands playing down here in Charleston." And Lucky looked at this guy. Lucky, another reason I think they call him Lucky, he would take a chance on anything. He looked this guy dead in the eye and said, "This is not a mixed band." And some of the guys are blonde with blue eyes and all this. There's no way in the world anybody would have mistaken any of these guys for being black, And so he went to each guy. I think if he had said, "Are you black?" he might have gotten a different answer. But he went to each of these guys and asked him, said, "Are you colored?" And each of the guys, going along with what Lucky had said, would say yes, and he'd sort of shake his head. And he got finally, the last of the guys he asked was Porky Cohen, who was our first trombone player. And he had a slight lisp. And when he asked him, now Porky is responding more emphatically than the other guys, and he said, "Why, certainly," with this lisp. And at this point, we had all been standing there chewing on our tongues and everything, trying not to break up because it was so ludicrous. And when he did this, you could almost feel the ground tremble with the guys laughing, trying not to let the sheriff see them. But at any rate, he turned to the deputy. He said, "Well, I guess if they all say they're colored, there ain't nothing we can do about it, is it, Jeff?" And so he said, "No, Sheriff," and they got in the car and they drove off. And we played that dance that night.
That's
amazing. It was very funny. And it might, as I mentioned to you, it might have been the first time that an integrated band played there. It's very possible that was the first time.
I read something when, I think it maybe was with Hampton, about the Barracuda.
Oh, jeez. Barracuda was a mythical person who came to clean up everything that was unsavory, whatever.
Yeah.
Lionel Hampton, for instance, his wife would buy a hat for him, a Stetson hat or some expensive hat, and when they put it on him in the shop, it looked just great. And when he'd come out, he'd have it on. Then the first time he took it off and put it on again, instead of the brim being like this, it would be waving, because he had it turned at an angle, and the guys would say, "That hat looks pretty bad." And someone would say, "Yeah, probably before the night is over, Barracuda will have it." And before the night would be over, Lionel would go to sleep in the bus or on the train, the hat would disappear. Gone out the door of the train or someplace and thrown away. Or if they had some arrangements, we'd get some arrangements, and nobody particularly liked it. And the guys would say, "Well, I think before this week is out, Barracuda will probably end up with the first trumpet part and the first alto parts or something." And sure enough, Lionel would call that tune a couple nights later, and guys would start fishing. Say, "Geez, I can't find the first trumpet part. And the lead alto part's gone, and the trombone parts are gone."
Oh, man.
Everybody's gone. They throw it away. Somebody. With Dinah Washington was with us. She joined the orchestra, and we were on a train making a long trip, and she had these bedroom slippers on like rabbit fur. Yeah. And the guys were saying, this really brings the band down. The guys were saying, they said, "Don't worry, Barracuda will take care of it." And of course, she woke up the next morning, she had one slipper.
That's great.
I mean, they would do things like that.
But to throw away the one is even better, too.
Sure.
If they're both missing, the one is...
But that's what
perfect.
that's who Barracuda
Yeah.
was. We never discovered exactly who he was, but he was there.
The jam session was a big part of learning
Oh
the
yeah,
music.
it was. Well, I used to go to Minton's.
Uh-huh.
Guys used to jam in there. Sometimes play with Charlie Parker.
Uh-huh.
And Monk used to play there. He would be what's her name? Carmen McRae used to. She used to sing there, and she used to play piano. Sometimes she played piano very well.
Yeah.
And sometimes she would be there and I'd play behind her or something.
Seems like I read something about a fellow that you called the Demon. The Demon?
Oh, the Demon at
Yeah.
at Minton's.
Who was this?
He was a tenor player. I think he played tenor, and he was a fellow who didn't play very well,
Uh-huh.
but he was very persistent. He would come up and when all the other guys were up there jamming, guys who were known to be pretty talented, and he would just stand there, and say he'd stand there and sort of look with his horn hanging and say, like, when do I play, or something. And finally, somebody say, okay, come on. They called him a demon because he would play like 10 choruses and compiled, they wouldn't make one decent chorus, but he would never let up till he'd played maybe 8 or 9 choruses or something. And the guys would be saying, will he ever stop, And then Teddy Hill, the former band leader, was the manager of the club. And Eddie Lockjaw Davis was like the major domo in this place, and the guys would say, he'd be standing up there. He's the one, he would be very nice. He'd say, okay, come on, Demon, you can play. And he'd get fed up. He'd say, okay, like, are you going to stop the guy? We keep playing. He would go get Teddy Hill. And he'd say, Teddy, come get the Demon. And Teddy would come, and Teddy would stand there. And the Demon would still be playing, and Teddy would stand and say, okay, Demon, get off my bandstand. Just chase him off the bandstand.
Oh,
It
my.
was crude, but it was comical, too, And he never stopped. He would, the next night, he'd be back doing the same thing.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah, there's some funny times.
This is actually a hard question to ask and answer, because improvising is something that is rather hard to define. But actually a student yesterday was asking, I think, the same question, and about your thought process when you're improvising. Is it possible to verbalize what you think about on any particular tune while you're playing?
No, I don't know. These things come to you automatically. I mean, sometimes, usually if I'm going to play something while someone else is playing, I'll try to think of something that I would like to introduce my solo with, something that's relative to the quality, the nature of the piece itself, and something that fits kind of harmonically with what's going on. And I usually try to think about that. And I also think it's just improvisation it's like giving a speech or something like that. You have a subject, and your interpretation of it may differ from mine, but it's still basically the same subject. So that's the theme that you're improvising around, and you try to play something that enhances it, and also adds a little different flavor to it. So you don't come in and play exactly what the person before you. You may even extract some of what he played as a lead-in to what you're going to do. And so you get that dovetailing. It's like passing the baton in a relay race. You do it smoothly. You don't do this. You're running and you pick up the same speed as that person whom you're going to accept the baton for or pass it to, and you get that smooth transition.
Yeah.
That's if you listen to a lot of improvisation in different groups, when they have that smooth transference from one to the other, that's the way it does. That's the way it comes off.
Yeah. It seems that there's too many stories about business people taking advantage of musicians over the years.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that, and has it changed?
Well, I think it's changed, and for instance, as in the case of the jazz party you have here at Hamilton, especially with people like Milt Fillius. I mean, these are men who are proud of who they are, and they want people who work for them to feel proud of having been associated with them. I'm using him as an example. There are a few others there aren't many, but there are some others who think likewise, and they treat the musicians very well with a great deal of respect, and of course they expect the same in return. But they're the exceptions. There are a lot of people who still think, for instance, I was called to do a recording with Maxine Sullivan, which turned out to be her last recording, and I would gladly have done it for nothing, basically. But the fellow who called me, when he called me and said that she had asked if I could do the recording with her, and I said I'd be flattered to do it. And I said, by the way, how much are you paying? And he said, hey, Joe, we pay Sidemen Scale. And I won't mention his name. I said, well, you've got it. Boom, and I just hung up on it. Now, these are guys who still think it's the 20s and the 30s, and musicians struggling, as they did during that period, would accept almost anything, and whatever you offer them, and you dictate the terms, not they,
Mm-hmm. Especially the attitude, too.
Yeah, you had a lot of that. And,
yeah.
And people, you'd go work in clubs and things, and they would pay the guys a pittance. They were making good money, but they wouldn't give it to them. Well, Lionel Hampton was a good case in point. Mm-hmm. I joined that band. I was making $11 a night, mm-hmm. and I was playing, at that time, the first trumpet player. I wasn't playing the high things. He had guys there, Ernie Royal, and guys who did that. But I was supposed to be the first trumpet player, and I was getting $11 a night. And I asked him at one point, when I discovered that the other guys, some of them were getting 15, I thought, well, why can't I get 15 too? And I asked him about it. He said, well, you better speak to Gladys, his wife. And he said, well, she takes care of that. So I spoke to her, and she said, yes, what is it, young man? And I said, well, I'd like to get $15 a night like everybody else. She said, well, honey, you better talk to Joe Glazer, who was the manager.
Oh, boy.
And so I called his office and made an appointment to see him. And a couple days hence, I went to his office at the time, 2 o'clock, like he said. And when I walked in, he said, his secretary said, who are you? And I said, well, my name is Joe Wilder. And Mrs. Hampton told me to come and see Mr. Glazer. And I made an appointment for 2 o'clock. And she said, okay. And she called him on the intercom. And he said, okay, send him in. And when I went in, he said, what do you want? And I said, well, Mrs. Hampton told me to come and speak to you about getting a raise. He said, hey, you'll excuse the language. I said, who in the hell do you think you are? This is exactly the way he asked me. And I said, I looked at him and said, who in the hell do you think you are? And I turned around and walked out. And I went that night, I told Lionel, I said, if I don't get $15 a night from tonight on, I'm out. You have to get somebody else. And so he said, well, I'll talk to Gladys about it. So he spoke to her, and as of the next night, they did pay me $15 a night. But that was the attitude towards the musicians, and unfortunately, in some places, it still prevails.
How's the work scene changed for you, like in the last 10 years? Do you pick and choose a little more than usual? I
think you're almost right on that. I think I'm picked and chosen on occasion.
Okay.
Sometimes I have the privilege of deciding what I want to do, but the offers are not that numerous now. And and the other thing is that I'm much older, mm-hmm. and I started out as a young player, and some of the older fellows were moved out to make room for me, and so it's the same thing now, and it's something you have to accept and understand, because as you get older, there are a lot of things that I find playing with the Smithsonian Orchestra. I do them, but I don't do them with the ease that I did when I was younger. I mean, I have to really, it calls for a lot more concentration and a lot more practice. So I accept that,
yeah.
But I still can't complain, because I still got a lot of nice things, and most of them, with regards to picking and choosing, I do decide if I'm not going to enjoy doing it, I won't do it, because I'm too old to be hassled by what I have to do.
He must be look at your career and be pretty happy.
Yeah, I am. I've been one of the most fortunate musicians, I guess, in the country. Mm-hmm. Most of the things I did with people I enjoyed doing them with. Most of the music I was involved with, I got great enjoyment out of, and I still do. I mean, it's like the guys who were here with the other night. I mean, how can you go someplace as an employee and have that much fun? It's unreal.
A life well lived is an apt description for Joe Wilder. I was very privileged to spend some time with him both on the bandstand and just as a friend. And he was a rare person that had an aura to him. If you spent time with him, you felt better about yourself. And I think if you watch our full interviews with Joe on this channel, I think that feeling will come through the screen for you. He was a dear friend, a friend of Hamilton College, a friend of many musicians, and a role model in more ways than one. Happy 100th birthday, Joe.